All right, so threat modeling. Let's get started here and have an idea of what it is so we can get started. So we're going to talk about the different categories of threats that exist. We'll talk about the different actors, and finally, how do we actually model out our threats? So first, we have different categories of these threats, and the first one I'd like to bring up are the adversarial. So who can tell me what are adversarial threats? What makes something an adversarial threat? Give me an example of an adversarial threat.
Could it be like someone? No, I think it would be somebody from the outside. I was thinking somebody from the inside at first, but I guess
Hmm.
it'd be someone from the outside posing a threat to any vulnerability in the system that could potentially be.
I agree that it can be somebody from the outside, but I think it can also be somebody
Someone
from
from
the
the inside.
inside.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what is it that determines if something's going to be an adversarial threat?
I
There's an
guess if some,
opposing actor.
yeah, yeah, have an
Say that
issue with.
again?
I said that there's an opposing actor.
An opposing actor. Yeah, yeah. That exactly. It's it's that there's something deliberate happening, right? There's not just it's not something random. It's not just it just didn't randomly happen or some kind of accident. It is someone chose to do something, and this can be someone external to you, but it also can be someone internal. What's an example of an internal adversarial threat?
A disgruntled employee.
Yeah, right. Someone's mad that they're getting canned, and then they just take down the whole system. Right. This
Right.
is absolutely a threat that exists and can happen. Other adversarial threats, somewhat internal, somewhat external, maybe your suppliers, customers, anyone outside, like hackers, nation states, all depends. But what makes a adversarial threat is that there's a deliberate action being taken. All right. So what makes something accidental then? I'll just go ahead and give it out, right? It's the opposite. It's mistakes. Someone did it, but they just made a mistake. And we can't think of too many times that this might ever happen. Except I do want to give this example. In 2017 here. 2017, AWS, this whole US East region went down. And so I'll share this blog post, but it's essentially this first few lines right here. At 9:37, an authorized S3 team member using an established playbook executed a command which was intended to remove a small number of servers. Um, Unfortunately, one of the inputs of the command was entered incorrectly, and a larger set of servers was removed than intended, taking down the entire US East region for hours, right? This is a threat. Accidents happen, and you need to be able to account for them. Cool. So we have accidental threats. Structural threats are things when fail at the point of exhaustion. So hard drives go bad at a certain time. Old age, resources deplete. Any type of structural failing would be one of these sorts of threats. And then finally, we have environmental threats. So perhaps fires or floods, or your HVAC system goes down and things overheat. These are additional threats that would be categorized as environmental. Any question on these different categories of threats? It's important to be able to bucket these. Cool. So let's talk about the different actors. Now, there's a whole spectrum of different threat actors, and we're going to kind of categorize them in terms of their danger or their capability. And we'll start from the lowest level and move to the highest level. Oh. And these are the threat actors. I want to talk about the cyber threat actors. So you got your script kiddie. These are the lowest level of attackers. These are the people that, have just learned how to use Metasploit. These are the people that you guys are just a bit better than now, because you can actually change some exploits and get them to work for you, right? So above that, we've got hacking groups. Essentially, you take one script kiddie and put them together with a certain amount of time on their hands, and you got a hacking group. Does anyone have any examples of hacking groups that they can put forth?
We have Anonymous.
Yeah, Anonymous is a perfect example of a hacking group. Just a bunch of people that are essentially script kiddies at that level, and just kind of hacking for fun and because they have time, without really any cause. Which brings you to the next level of threats, which would be hacktivists. Essentially, you take a hacking group and give them a cause. They have reason for doing what they want to do now, not just because they're bored, right? Hacktivists are much more dangerous than just random hacking groups that are hacking for fun. On the next level up, we've got the black hat professionals, people that are hacking for their job. They may be individuals essentially running malware, ransomware attacks, things like that. Above them, and again, similar to hacking, script kiddie and hacking groups, you just combine them, add more people, more brains to it. You have organized criminal gangs, perhaps working on dark market websites, all sorts of things like that. Above this, and at the highest level, you have nation states. And I do think that depending on the nation, there is absolute overlap between the organized criminal gangs and the nation states. But where you can draw the boundary is, or what makes the nation states different, is that they essentially have unlimited resources for their attacks. They are looking for their attack and their way in every single day, and then, have the unlimited resource to hire trained professionals and carry out these attacks. Very recently, we have the United States deciding how they're going to pursue nation states that commit cyber crimes. I think I referenced earlier that North Korea was doing some cyber crimes, some ransomware attacks, and we actually go after the individuals that ran these attacks. Now there are like warrants for them. They're not really actionable, right? Because these people are in North Korea or in China. This is apparently how the United States is going about it, and treating these individuals instead of the nation states that are actually running the attacks. So, any kind of questions on this kind of spectrum of threat actors and their capabilities? Like I said, there's a lot of overlap, but it's important to note the different capabilities so that you can measure your threats. Okay, so let's get to the actual modeling part, the actual work of this. And so we're going to go through one method of threat modeling, and I'll show you another one. And there's plenty of different methods of generating threat models. There's a whole textbook on threat modeling, but we'll look at just a few so you get the idea. So first, you need to have context. What is your business? What is your organization? What are the things you're trying to protect? So in this example, we'll talk about just a pizza place. We'll talk about maybe like Domino's, which is a real place that some of our graduates ended up working at in their SOC. So we have business requirements there. So what business requirements might Domino's have? Well, you're taking online orders, right? You have customer information when they make accounts, where they live, and how they pay for things. So you have to keep those things secure. Perhaps you have the actual people that deliver the pizza. You have to keep them secure, right? So what are the requirements for the business? Next up, what are the assets? What are the things that you care about? What about your social media account for Domino's? Do we care if that gets hacked? Well, how will that affect us if that gets hacked? Who would even want to hack that? Maybe competitors that may want to affect what our reputation is. So we need to define the scenarios and define what our assets are. That would be the next step after defining the business requirements. Then you have fun and you get to be creative and you list out as many threats as you can. All of them, like everything in your brain, spill it out. And what you do once you've listed all of these threats is map them to assets. So map them to how if this threat acts on this asset or on this vulnerability, how will that affect CIA? How will that affect AAA? Right? So you list out as many threats as possible, map them to what will this threat affect if it is realized, and map that to how will this affect CIA? How will this affect AAA? Okay, and if you'll notice, this is actually what's going on here. Identifying the threat sources and events, which is, what do we care about and what might our attackers care about? And identifying the vulnerabilities, right? So we're listing out as many threats as we can right here, identifying the threat sources and the vulnerabilities, following along that framework. So once we have all of these threats, we actually have to narrow it down and start getting realistic and talk about what is it that we're actually afraid of happening, and then categorize these threats and prioritize them. Right? So there are other ways of modeling threats, like I alluded to. You can look at all of the different vulnerabilities you have, say, hey, I'm not worried about threats. I'm just going to worry about every single vulnerability that I have, right? You just enumerate all your vulnerabilities. Use some scanners like Nikto and Nessus and just find out what are all my vulnerabilities. Those are the things I can control. That's all I'm going to worry about. And then you create a threat model based on anything that can be relevant to those vulnerabilities. Additionally, there's tool-based. This is much more often for software when you're modeling threats to software. Microsoft has a threat modeling tool, and essentially it creates data flow diagrams. So data transfers through your app in different directions. This tool will suggest common places that it may leak or where you should be careful and protect. So let's just summarize this modeling. We have to categorize and label all of these threats, right? We have adversaries, accidental threats, structural threats, and environmental threats. And it's important for us to categorize them so we know how to respond to each. It helps to assess the severity and likelihood. So we can calculate what sort of risk we're dealing with here. And models define what's in scope. So if it's not in our threat model that we create, it's not something we should worry about then. Or if you are worried about it, you need to update your threat model, right? The threat model is the plan. If it's not in the threat model, you need to update your threat model or you need to not worry about it. You only defend against what's inside that threat model. So let's, again, look through here on what threat modeling looks like, right? Identify all of your different threats and different events that you may be looking toward. Identify any vulnerabilities or things that can possibly happen. And then here's that final part, right? How likely is this to actually occur, right? I know China is taking all sorts of data, but am I, as an individual, particularly worried about China having my data? No, it's not in my threat model, right? For me as an individual. Perhaps if I was working for a company that had proprietary information, like maybe Tesla or something, maybe I would update my threat model then because I could be a vulnerability to the company, or that'd be something I'd be more worried about. Determining the magnitude of impact. If this thing goes wrong, how bad is it going to be, right? And then once you've determined that, you can actually determine the risk. And oftentimes you want to talk about risk in terms of dollars, like, well, what is this going to actually cost? Okay, so let's talk about what we're going to be doing for this afternoon. We've got this here. So we're going to talk about how to model threats. We have one example here for you, which is a pizza place, just Cyber Pizza, right? And you're going to go through and do threat models for each one of these. So a personal threat model for you as an individual, one for a full stack academy, one for a large internet corporation, and for journalists. And I'd like you guys to offer some remediation. So what should you be doing now that you have these threats to better protect you? And we have examples here. As you go through this, you'll notice each one we offer less and less guidance. So the first one with the pizza place offers the most guidance. So if you take a look at the example here, when you're listing things out, the other things I'd like you to list out is how it affects CIA or AAA as you're listing out your adversarial threats and so on, right? So for example, thieves breaking into the safe and steal the pizza making secrets, right? That's an adversarial threat, right? Someone's consciously making that decision, and that's affecting my confidentiality. Right now, if they go in there and change the pizza recipe, right, if that's something else I'd be worried about, then that's changing the integrity. So you're going to go through here and be as creative as possible as you're listing these things out. I think it should take I would suggest about 25 to 30 minutes for each one of these. And list them out in a Google Doc. And we're going to collect that Google Doc at the end. So each group should have one Google Doc of kind of like biz forms for each one of them. And we'll collect them at the end of the day just so we can provide some feedback. It's not something for grading. It's just really so I can provide you guys feedback on your threat modeling, right? It's a valuable skill. I want you guys to get as comfortable as you can with reporting and with writing sorts of reports like this. So let's stop share. Do we have any questions?